Well, anyway, thank you for joining us for tonight's discussion, The Future of Democracy in America, a conversation with The Atlantic. The editor of The Atlantic told me I have to really pump up the mentions of The Atlantic. It's The Atlantic Monthly. It's over 150 years old. It was a monthly. Now it's a minutely. Yeah, come. I don't know how you read every word of the copy too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anyway, you try. Yeah. Well, this is an incredible crowd, and suggests that there are a fair number of people who have some interest in tonight's subject, or maybe it's just a cult. I don't know. We have Ann Applebaum, George Packer, and Jeff Goldberg. Ann and George are star writers of The Atlantic. Jeff is the star editor and also sometimes the star writer. But I want to point out in the most self-serving possible way that all three are American Academy alums. And indeed, all three had connections to the Academy that predate their connection with The Atlantic. So although The Atlantic is 150 years older than the Academy, this is really an Academy event, but with a lot of lip service being done to The Atlantic. And tonight we're going to discuss just what on earth is going on with the world's longtime Democratic superpower. Few journalists out there today have been so far out in front on reporting on the developments threatening American democracy or the global rise of authoritarianism. And it is very hard to believe that our new post-Cold War period is all of 6 weeks old. It's only been 6 weeks. It feels like an eternity. But I am really, really grateful to have these three here today. And judging by the turnout, I'm not alone in thinking that. One of the oddities of introductions is that the less people need it, the more you have to do it. But so let me just say a few words about our guests. Ann Applebaum is a historian, a senior fellow at the Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University, and a staff writer at The Atlantic. She was a fellow at the Academy in 2006 and 2008. And I just have to drop a footnote here. Both Ann and George comprise the entire group of people who have ever been fellows twice. We try not to let anyone know that, but but I couldn't, what was I going to do? Pretend they hadn't been here? So to the current fellows, don't try this. It's not going to work. We no longer have
previous regime.
We no longer have fellows come back, much as we would like to. Anyway, Ann has really dedicated a long and distinguished career to examining the rise of authoritarianism and the challenges that face democracies worldwide. She won the Pulitzer Prize in 2004 for her work, The Gulag, A History. Just last year, as most of you know, she won the Friedenspreis des Deutschen Buchhandels. And she has a basket full of other honors, which were I to enumerate them, we wouldn't get to the conversation. Her most recent book is Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. She is the co-host of The Atlantic's podcast, Autocracy in America, and there she delves into the subtle and increasingly not so subtle erosion of democratic institutions in the U.S. George Packer is a staff writer at The Atlantic and is famous for his deep explorations of American life, as exemplified in such work as his masterful book, The Unwinding, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 2013, and his 2021 book, Last Best Hope, America in Crisis and Renewal. And few writers today connect the dots from the lived experience of individual Americans to the national stage. George was a fellow in 2009 and 2014, I am compelled to say. And as many of you know, he is also the author of an extraordinary biography of Richard Holbrooke, founder of the American Academy in Berlin. Jeffrey Goldberg, last but not least, is the man of the week. And we call him, we've been saying that he's the man of the week because he is doing events all week here in Berlin. So it's Jeffrey Goldberg week here in in Germany's capital. He is not only an alumnus of the Academy, he was a fellow here in 2015. He is also an Academy trustee and therefore one of the most important people in my life. We are especially grateful for his continued engagement, since he once described his class of fellows as being comprised of 7 or so experts on Peloponnesian pottery.
He did know a tremendous amount about Peloponnesian pottery.
Yeah, and should the conversation flag, we'll head in that direction. Jeff is the.
In my year, there was an expert on Troy, who's actually who I still remember everything he said to this day. So.
Yeah, well, Troy was important. Jeff is the 15th editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and under his leadership, the magazine has produced some truly fearless journalism across an incredible expanse of topics. Does that include my articles? Okay.
Especially your articles.
Thank you. And during his tenure, The Atlantic won its first 3 Pulitzer Prizes, as well as the National Magazine Award for General Excellence, the highest honor bestowed by the industry for the past 3 years in a row. He has done all this while continuing to publish his own work as well. And if you haven't read his profile of former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, from late 2023, I urge you to do so after the event. Jeff is the author of several books, moderator of Washington Week with The Atlantic on the public broadcasting system. And I have to say, I imagine that is a huge challenge for you, not only because of the time it takes, but as the person with one of the very best senses of humor in Washington, you have to kind of keep a straight face through all the insanity.
I don't know.
No?
It's all jokes all the way down.
All right. I guess we know what to look forward to. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including the National Magazine Award for Reporting, the Daniel Pearl Award for Reporting, and the Overseas Press Club Award for Human Rights. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation for about 35 minutes. Those of you who are here and still on this side of the Wannsee, just put up your hand if you want to ask a question. If you're joining us via live stream, type your question in the Q&A part of the Vimeo platform. And I apologize if we don't get to everyone. So let's get started. I think that it's fair to say we've all been astonished by the cannonade of executive orders emanating from the White House, the rampage through the bureaucracy by a chainsaw-toting Elon Musk, and the upending of decades of U.S. bipartisan foreign policy, and the apparent reorientation towards Putin's Russia. So I want to keep this upbeat. My staff told me I had to, and I guess let me, start with the other side of it, which is the administration is still showing up for court appointments. Congress is still meeting, if not exactly deliberating. People are showing up and telling their congressmen what they think of them. Why don't we just go quickly through the 3 of you, or slowly through the 3 of you, and talk about what you think of the state of American democracy and what worries you most and what gives you encouragement. George.
Thank you, Daniel. Upbeat? Well, when I look at the incredible production of microchips going on in the greater Phoenix area, I feel hopeful for my country. On the other hand, what worries me most is the American people, because I think what we've seen in the last 6 weeks is that the checks on Trump's power that we grew up learning about in civics, Congress, the independence of the military, quasi-independent civil service, at least a non-patronage civil service, and probably the courts have all failed or seem like they're about to lie down. And what does that leave? It leaves public opinion. And Trump has always relied on public opinion because it is when he's doing illegitimate things, it's his claim to legitimacy. I speak for the people. And when he wins an election, wins the popular vote, he has a credible claim to speaking for a lot of the people. So I'm just watching what's happening out in the country. I haven't done reporting on this yet, but I hope to, because I think the key thing is whether the Trump administration begins to lose its supporters. It's not going to lose its MAGA base. They are permanent members of the Trump cult. It might lose some of the people who went Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump, and there are enough of them. But how do they express it? And when do they express it? And when they want to, will there be the free and fair election next time around that they assume they'll be able to express it through? I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't see exactly how we avoid, now that Trump has full control over all the levers of the federal government and some of the states, how we're going to have an election in which people can really freely and fairly vote and have their votes fairly counted. So I think it's up to the people. And right now, my confidence in them is kind of low. I feel like I've been cutting them a lot of slack for many years. I've been accused of cutting them too much slack. After 2016, when I heard Trump won because everyone who voted for him is a white supremacist and a misogynist, if you're going to write them off like that, then maybe it is hopeless, and maybe it's also a losing strategy. 2020 seemed like, well, a lot of people voted in the middle of the pandemic. That's a good sign. There's still a belief in democracy, and the January 6th insurrection didn't succeed. When he came back from January 6th into the good graces of the Republican Party, that was when I became really deeply worried, because I realized that party is gone, can't be counted on to protect our democracy. And when the people added their voice to it last year, I stopped wanting to cut them slack. I think they've spoken, and they may well lose it.
Not all the people.
Enough.
So what I'm experiencing watching what's going on in the United States is a form of what I would call moderated deja vu. As some of you know, I lived part of the time in Poland. And in Poland in 2015, we elected, and I'm a Polish citizen as well as a U.S. citizen, we elected an autocratic populist party that almost immediately also sought to capture the state. I mean, to use the correct term, that is actually what's happening now in Washington, and it's not new to America, and it's been done many times before, and we know what it looks like. We have different political systems in the U.S. and Poland, and I won't go into all the details. In Poland, they started with the judiciary because it was possible to seek to change the highest courts. But they also sought to capture the civil service exactly in the way that Elon Musk is seeking to change the nature of the civil service in the United States. They went through these various institutions, and initially there was some reaction, and there were some big demonstrations, especially in regard to the courts. But it turned out in the first 2 or 3 years that people weren't deeply moved by theoretical change. So if you said you're losing the independence of the judiciary, that didn't mean enough to enough people. It was they don't know any judges. They are themselves not in courts. The idea that this was some kind of deep problem of the political system just didn't seem to be relevant to most people. And it took some time. And this is where I'll go back to the United States in a second. It took some time before that captured judiciary, that changed judiciary, began to make decisions that affected people. In Poland, there was a big one, which is that it narrowed, abortion is illegal in Poland, but they narrowed the law further so that women who had complicated pregnancies couldn't always have emergency abortions, and some of them died. And when that happened, for a lot of people, this drew a line, and this happened because of the captured constitutional court. People, for the first time, drew a line between this theoretical conversation about democracy and judges and stuff that happened to real people. And so what I'm waiting for in the United States, and I don't know how long it will take or exactly what form it will take, I'm waiting for the changes to the nature of the political system to begin to affect people in a way that they feel. And then we'll know the answer to your question. I don't know how clear it is outside of Germany. But one other thing I think should be clear is that much of what we've seen so far is a power grab. So when Musk uses the expression Department of Government Efficiency to describe what he's doing to state institutions, that's actually that's misleading. What he's doing is not designed to increase efficiency. If you want efficiency, you don't randomly fire people. You look for ways to save money. You understand the departments that you're trying to change. You understand what they do. What he's doing is creating a system that will scare and frighten people, make them leave the civil service, and then replace them with loyalists. They've already established in some of the U.S. government agencies these kind of purity tests. You have to say, if you want a promotion now in the Department of Justice, you have to say, what did you think happened on January the 6th? You have to say who won the 2020 election. But again, these are stories that we know from other countries. We know it from Poland. We know it from Hungary. We know it from Turkey. We know it from Venezuela. We know it from other places. And so at the moment, the people affected most are the federal civil servants who've been fired or who are, and those are, by the way, all over the country. They're in the Forestry Service in Idaho, and they're in the Department of Agriculture all over the country. The people most affected are them. As the change begins to happen elsewhere, as people feel the changes to the Environmental Protection Agency or the Health Service or maybe even Social Security, then we'll begin to understand what the reaction is. I mean, every reaction like that, every assault on the state has a counter reaction, and it will come.
What was the question again?
Yeah.
Right. Wait, can I just say just one word about each person up here? I have nice words about you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to thank the Academy for doing all this and putting this on. It's been a great pleasure to be affiliated with this institution for many years. Excellent leadership all the way through the years. Dan, you're doing a wonderful job. I'm not on the compensation committee of the trustees, so I can say that without impact or effect. But it's really great that you're doing this, and it's hard to lead an institution devoted to the buttressing of the American-German relationship when one party isn't interested in buttressing the American-German relationship but undermining it. So good luck with that. And let me just say just a word about my two esteemed colleagues, if you don't mind. You're thinking of something to say. You're thinking of something witty to say. No? You mentioned Anne's collection of prizes. This is what it's like working with Anne. I call up Anne to have lunch one day, and she says, "I can't. I'm receiving some prize from the King of Spain." And then I said, "Oh right, I am too. I forgot. Wait, what time do we have to be there?" And what I want to say about George is that so far the King of Spain has not granted him a prize. We're working. No, you never know. We're working on that. But what I will say about George is that one of the delightful things that happens at the Atlantic when I'm hiring a young person to be a junior editor or a copy editor or a young reporter, not infrequently, people ask me if one day they might get a chance to meet George Packer, which is quite touching. They also want to meet Anne Applebaum as well. But again, she's in Madrid, probably. So with all that, the question was, why is everything so screwed up? Is that some version of that? Where's my source of hope?
How bad is it?
So apart from the fact that the 80-year post-World War II liberal international order organized and maintained by the United States is now officially over, and that the United States is aligned with the Kremlin against Europe. That put that aside for a minute, and I'm sure Anne has comments on that, and George. The things I worry about, the less visible manifestation. I worry about two things. One is a subject that Anne has written about wonderfully well, which is complicity. I am trying, and I've been trying for 9 years now, not to be shocked by the behavior of people I know or knew. And I'm thinking of Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and all these sorts of people who change their stripes in order to fit in with the crowd. Anne has pointed out in The Atlantic that complicity is actually the norm in human behavior, not principled dissent. It's hard to do principled dissent, especially
Marion Bertler told me that.
And now the proper credit. But it's a fascinating idea that we assume that the natural impulse of somebody would be to stand for what they believe. It's not the natural impulse, and it's amazing how easily some people have bent to this. There's no Trump without those who bent toward Trump. I include J.D. Vance in that category, obviously, but there are dozens of people who know better. There's a category of people in the government right now who don't know better. Fine, but those who know better, or those who've changed their views, worry me terribly. The other issue that worries me is the velocity of change overwhelms us cognitively. So you could argue, obviously, that the Zelensky, J.D. Vance, Trump fight was the most important event of the past week, possibly the past decades. But at the same time that happened, the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, the federal prosecutor for Washington, who's a Trump loyalist, fired the 7 senior-most prosecutors actually demoted the 7 senior-most prosecutors in his office, who are the people who prosecuted the January 6th rebellion, insurrection, and who prosecuted Steve Bannon and other figures in MAGA world. And they were not only were they bumped down to jobs that will force them to quit, they even had their parking spots seized. I mean, that's how deliberate and petty it gets. But what, and I use that as one example. There are many others. The seizure of the Kennedy Center means that there's a deliberate attempt to seize the commanding heights of culture. And I don't have any issues with the culture that they want to put in, the Trump people want to put in. It's fine. Maybe the Kennedy Center was too elite. Maybe it was too not focused on whatever music it is that people in Trump were like. That's fine. But this was a deliberate attempt to seize the commanding heights. I worry about a whole range of issues that people don't talk about because there are actually bigger issues. Obviously, looking at Rochelle over here, but we're about to welcome measles back to the United States in service of magic, occult thinking, and so there's all of that. One thing I don't worry about, to just close out, is I don't worry about yet is the freedom of the press, so long as the ownership class maintains its integrity. Now, the entirety of the ownership class has not maintained its integrity. We happen to work for somebody who has not fallen down the slope that Jeff Bezos has fallen down, that the owner of the Los Angeles Times has gone down, CBS ownership, ABC ownership. But there's still a vibrant free press in the United States. They will, I predict, come after us in clever and maybe subtle and maybe not so subtle ways. But we exist. You can still say what you want. And so for that reason, among others, all is not lost.
Have you been surprised by the extent to which people have, so far it appears, many of the sort of publishing class that you mentioned have capitulated? I'm struck by the fact that, half of the discussion in Washington now is about tariffs, which seems to be Donald Trump's answer to almost everything. And, it just looks like suicidal in terms of the economy. And yet you don't ever hear that, Big Pharma has gotten on the phone and said, you can't do that.
Let me give you a very quick answer to that, which is that if I had $1 billion, I'd say whatever the hell I want. And I just don't understand the behavior of people who are so wealthy that they're liberated from consequence. I don't understand it. Again, it goes to, Anne could probably better answer this because she understands the nature of complicity and the bending toward power.
There's another strange factor, which is that, there's still doubt in people's minds about what Trump means to do when he says something. So when we haven't had this experience with other presidents, I don't know, George W. Bush or Barack Obama said, I'm going to do policy X. Then there was a kind of debate. Is policy X good? Is policy X bad? There would be different think tanks would have views and people would write papers about it and maybe editorials, and articles and investigations. When Trump says he wants to do something, we don't know whether it's real, and that was what, and that creates a strange reaction. So he said at the very beginning of his presidency, he wants to take Greenland. And I was actually in Denmark the day that he had this horrible telephone call the day after he had the telephone call with the Danish prime minister. And it was a very funny day. I did write about it. I was supposed to have one meeting and that was canceled. And I was supposed to have another meeting and that was canceled because there was a kind of national crisis and meltdown because no one in Copenhagen knew what this meant. But what was really at the heart of it was not, a lot of people were having, here's the significance of Greenland and here are these minerals in Greenland. People realized that there was a kind of Kafkaesque emptiness at the, why does he want it? And almost anything he could possibly want to do in Greenland, he can do right now. He can have a treaty with the Danish government and build 6 military bases if he wants. And it was this realization that he wants it because he wants the map to look bigger, maybe, because he wants to change the borders of the United States. He wants to exert power. And this was not something that you could write a position paper about or debate. And this is the tariffs are the same thing. Are the tariffs actually an economic policy? The point is to raise money for the Treasury, which he says sometimes. Or are they a kind of expression of his willpower? I can make Canada scream. I can cause pain in the European Union and just to see what happens. And that makes it very hard for anyone, whether it's the CEO of a pharma company or whether it's, a prime minister of a European country, to even know how to analyze this. Like, what are the correct arguments that you should make to Trump? Should you come to Washington and say this would be a very bad idea, Mr. President? Should you flatter him? Should you write a paper? Should you get a bunch of economists to say this is a very bad idea, it's bad for business? I think that's actually already happened. And the fact that these are policies that aren't based on any judgment about what's good for America or any judgment about what's good for the economy, these are power plays, games. I think, I'll finish by saying, for me, the most extraordinary thing about the Oval Office conversation on Friday was actually that it became clear in the course of the conversation that what really bothered the president and the vice president of the United States was the fact that the Ukrainian president kept pointing out, he kept bringing them back to reality. Trump, we're going to do a deal with Putin. Okay. And Zelensky says, actually, we did a bunch of deals with Putin. He always broke the treaties. And then, so what would we do? Then Trump, it's not going to happen, and what really angered them was when Zelensky sort of burst their alternative reality and said, no, that's not true. And this is the thing that I think is going to be very hard for everybody, for Americans, but also for Europeans, is that they're in a different reality. They're not interested in the good of the Americans. They're interested in themselves, their power, their image, what's said about them in the podcast world. And that applies to tariffs, but it also applies to a lot of other things.
So let me try out an an understanding of the drama of the tariffs on you all. It seems to me that Trump has a need to kind of stage manage every interaction with a particular issue. Ukraine a little different, but the Canadians don't even know why he wants to inflict tariffs on them, which is a remarkable thing when you think about it. But he will say, I'm gonna impose 25% tariffs, and what he has done is essentially created an opposition, and he holds the ability to resolve that by saying, at the site of any kind of concession or effort to do anything, it's like, I won. And so it's this constant stream of, I showed them who was boss and I won. And that seems to me a lot of what's going on with the tariffs. I kind of wonder how long you can play that trick. He did this, of course, in the first term, in the way he stage managed meetings with the North Korean leader and even the Chinese. And, it was like, Chinese ultimately capitulated. They're going to buy $100 billion of our goods. They never did, but he claimed that he did it and he won. And it seems like there's a profound need for, winning so much you'll get tired of winning, as he once said.
Well, I think what he's showing is that we're a pretty powerful country, actually. And if our position in the world is just to squeeze and squeeze until we get what we want, whether it's some trade deal that is beneficial to us or a piece of land, we actually have a fair amount of muscle to do that. And people are you asked about capitulation. Countries are going to capitulate because they're scared. And it shows you that for all its wrongs, the American Pax Americana, the liberal international order, whatever you want to call it, did show a certain restraint over 80 years, because we're now seeing what it looks like unrestrained. And it looks like something closer to 19th century might makes right, great power behavior. But I want to go back to capitulation at home, because I think we have to look at, in some ways, at ourselves and ask, why are elites, and we're sort of at the lower ranks of maybe of the elite class.
Lower upper middle class.
We're lower upper middle class.
Right.
In Orwell's famous phrase. Why have so many capitulated? And I have to think it's because a lot of them never really cared all that much about liberal democracy. It just didn't mean anything in their guts. It was a nice system. It was stable. It was profitable, but it wasn't a profound value. So if it suddenly looks like might not be so wise to endorse Trump's opponent, even if you're the second, third, whatever richest man on earth, you might not feel you're losing very much by killing that endorsement. And I think one thing we really need to think about is how we also let this happen. Something that's not fun to think about. It's not nice. And it may feel a bit lopsided because it's Trump and his party who are doing this. But I do think the idea that globalization would make us free and prosperous and would make the world more free and prosperous, which was the guiding ideology of the post-Cold War, it failed abroad in a lot of places, although a lot of countries did become richer. It also created inequality abroad, and it created massive inequality in the West. In some ways, the losers of globalization was the Western working class. And how attuned to that were the leaders of our institutions? How much did they want to know about it? How well did they understand it? Why was Trump such a mystery to the American press? Even today, there's something mysterious about him and his people. They're talked about a little bit like a foreign body, and sometimes he acts like a foreign body, the Manchurian Candidate. But it's something that I think we can't escape, is to ask, yes, liberal democracy is on the ropes. It needs to fight back. But also, what does it need to understand about itself that got us into this position? Because it didn't simply happen because 49.5% or whatever the American people voted for Trump.
You have a response.
You could run for office now.
Yeah.
That's good. I think what George is leading to is this would not have happened had the Democratic Party had an adequate response to Trumpism, and obviously they had plenty of time. I mean, you can center the blame on Joe Biden for reneging on his promise to be a transitional figure. You could center your critique on identity politics. You could send. There was a fascinating meeting of the DNC over the past week where they came up with a new centrist platform, and the first item in the platform was, "We should be a patriotic, pro-American party." It's like, if you have to tell yourself that's a prerequisite for entering the discussion, well, then you're a little late. But the interesting thing is that the reckoning hasn't really happened. I mean, you might have your own views of that, but I don't think the reckoning has happened, and the party is captured by different interests that can't seem to compromise. This is not to blame the Democrats for the rise of Trump. I blame the people, those who know better, for the rise of Trump, and I blame social media and the softening of the shelling of the beach that 20 years of reality TV represents, and all the rest. But for those of you who are looking for some kind of relief in the form of a Democratic Party not only ready to fight, but to fight in the language of, let's just call them normie Americans, the 60 or 70% of Americans who fit into the broad middle. They're not there yet. And you add into that a subject that Ann, George, and I talk about frequently, the fact that there will be continued attempts, state by state, in the next election, the midterms in 2026, there will be continued attempts, you have to assume, to steal elections that aren't going in that direction, voter suppression and all kinds of other shenanigans. And you have to be ready for that as well. So just because the Democrats might become more popular, let's say egg prices continue to rise, inflation goes up, don't assume that everything is as straightforward as it seems. There will still be efforts to suppress voters who don't accord to MAGA principles. But this whole thing has to start, and I'm not making a partisan argument here, I'm just making an observation. The whole thing has to start with a Democratic Party that knows how to talk to Americans.
Well, that's a really interesting point, only because, what we've seen is the sorting out of America according to education. Political parties, Democrats now clearly the party of the educated, Republicans the less educated, which Trump used to say, "Oh, I love those uneducated people." And yet, even though Democrats have often espoused policies that would benefit the less educated, they didn't have a way to talk to them about it, and they have lost vote share in a pretty dramatic way.
Yeah, there's another issue here, which is the question of what matters more. Does reality still matter? So the fact that, I don't know, that Joe Biden, helped get new factories built and brought some manufacturing back to America. The fact that they did a child care benefit. Do policies matter? Are they affecting people? Or do they not really matter anymore? And are people more affected by the world that they live in online? And again, I come back to the Friday meeting in the Oval Office. I mean, that was also a conflict between real reality, so that people experience on the ground, and this kind of imaginary world where where other things are happening. And honestly, I don't know the answer. I don't know which matters more. Clearly, part of what the Democrats have to do, it's not just about their message, it's also about how do they, in this new world where online reality matters more than real reality, they can't just be having a policy conversation. It can't be about, fixing inflation even, or fixing the roads, or you're building infrastructure, because they did that. It has to be about what are the means by which they're reaching people. We now know that. I'm now not going to remember off the top of my head the exact statistics, but something like, I'm making this up, but approximately like 2/3 of Americans who get their news from journalism, meaning newspapers, television news, right wing or left wing, those 60%, some 2/3 of those people voted for Democrats. And the of the people who don't ever read any journalism and get their news from YouTube and social media and podcasts, the 60, 2/3 of them voted for Republicans. So there's also a question of, it's not just what they say, it's how they say it, and what is going to be the alternative to the to the alternative world that has been now successfully created online by some television, some social media, some podcasts, some YouTubers have created a world in which you hear one set of messages every day. How do Democrats reach into that? And is there some way of building an alternative?
So, and I want to stick with you just for 1 second, because I will open it up to the audience in a minute, but you're the Russia expert here. How do you explain the Trump-Putin thing, taking into account the Mueller report, which showed that, people, is it just Trump just likes the tougher guy on the block and ultimately wants to have an arrangement with whoever the powers are and carve up the rest, carve up the weak? How do you explain this? And let's assume for a moment that the most nefarious interpretations are.
So I don't need the nefarious interpretations. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need some secret meeting and I've never needed them. I wrote a lot about this in 2016. You can just use what you see in public, what we know for a fact, things that aren't disputed. And the undisputable truth is that Trump has been fascinated by Russia since the 1980s. He made his first trip in 1987. Afterwards, he came back and he took out these full-page ads in newspapers calling on the U.S. to stop wasting so much money on allies, meaning Europe and at that time Japan. So this has been a theme in his life for decades. He has also a long history of known interactions with Russian business, also over decades. I mean, the business that he was in, which is real estate, had, particularly in the 2000s, had a huge influx of mostly anonymous money, or at least a lot of it was anonymous money coming from Russia. And one of his sons famously said that. And so you don't need any more. He has a positive view of Russia. He has a positive view of Russian money. It's possible that in one of those low moments, Russian money bailed him out. There are a few examples of that. He admires people who operate as he would like to do, without checks and balances, without the rule of law, without boring courts and journalists and rules about transparency. He sees that Putin is able to operate that way, and he's attracted to that world. And so this is an attraction he's had for a long time.
Yeah,
he's jealous.
Yeah,
I mean, he's jealous. I mean, a loser looks like Justin Trudeau. That's what a loser looks like, right? A winner looks like someone who kills his enemies, beheads people in Saudi Arabia, commands an economy in China. He's just, sometimes the obvious thing is the obvious thing. He's more authoritarian in nature than he is democratic in nature. And we just haven't experienced that yet in American politics. We've had good presidents, we've had bad presidents, we just haven't had this. The Germany issue is a special issue. It cannot, well, I think
why does he have it in for the Germans?
Yeah. I think I do know the answer. Should I tell the answer?
Yeah, give it away. Yeah.
I can hold on till a commercial break to leave everybody anticipating. So there's a scene, a non-famous scene in the Oval Office in the first term. Remember, he had, as we all know, a pretty terrible relationship with Merkel. This is a confirmed story. I mean, multiple people heard this, and it is a guaranteed 100% true thing. The subject of Merkel came up in a meeting with some national security staff, and he said, and I apologize for the language, I'm just quoting him, and he said, "I hate that Kraut bitch." And the conversation went on about Merkel's various deficits, and then he explained why he hates the Kraut bitch so much. He said, let me tell you, I understand the Germans. I was raised by the biggest Kraut of all. And then he points to a picture of his father. He says, Fred Trump, the biggest Kraut of all. There's something, I mean, nobody's gotten him on the couch. People who try from a distance fail because you can't. But there's something tied up psychologically with his father, the way he was raised, the difficult emotional circumstances of his early childhood. And then there's the overlay of the usual reasons he doesn't like Democratic leaders who operate within restraints, because to him, to operate within restraints suggests that you are a loser, and that's why he obviously wants to lift all restraints on the behavior of American soldiers in war, for instance, because he cannot underestimate how much he looks at what Russia is doing in Ukraine and doesn't care. These things don't, he once said, and I'll end here, but this has always struck me, and you mentioned the Mark Milley, he once said to Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Milley was arguing for the demotion or the expulsion of a member of the SEAL team, of SEAL Team 6, for violating a corpse in Afghanistan. And he said, what's the difference? You're all a bunch of killers anyway. Meaning you in the military. So he doesn't. So he values brutality, and so if he values brutality, he's going to admire people who are brutal.
Yeah, I would also say for him, this relationship with Russia that goes back 50 years, this admiration for Putin, these are things that are important to him. And Ukraine is a kind of stumbling block. It's in the way. I mean, you could hear that in this contempt as well. Ukraine is an insignificant factor that is blocking this relationship that he wants to build. I mean, there are various stories of what he wants and what Putin wants. They want some kind of big meeting. They want a new Yalta. Maybe they want to do it with Xi Jinping. There's a lot of stuff, imaginary maybe stuff going around about what they think. But he has in his mind a kind of grand television scene, a big triumph, and Zelensky is in the way. And actually, to some degree, Europe is in the way. Europeans have these objections, and they need to be swept aside. And I think Jeff is right. That's the way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. That biggest crowd of all story, though. I mean, does that mean Fred Trump was a horrible authoritarian, as he was, according to biographers? If so, he may hate him, but he became him. So he took the wrong lesson from being raised by an authoritarian.
Yes, Dr. Packer,
Yeah,
you're right.
I'll collect my fee from the president at the end of our
I think you're
treatment.
I mean, we all do this game, and you're probably right, but we can't.
Who cares? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. The action
it's
is
all
action.
In the open with Trump. There are no secrets. There is nothing hidden.
He tells you what crimes he's going to do, and then he does them. It's like it's not that hard to read.
He voices his admiration for Putin repeatedly. Like, we don't need to know this. There's no secret. I mean, the one oddity I would add, and this is maybe also important for this audience. I mean, there is how and why he has come to repeat Russian propaganda, which is also something he's been doing for a long time, is an interest. I don't know the answer. I mean, I noticed it first in 2016 during the election, when he would literally pick up kind of Sputnik conspiracy theories. Obama created ISIS. Google searches favor Hillary Clinton. These were often Russian propaganda stories, and then he would grab them and use them in the campaign. And I saw him doing it. And whether he's just getting it from the internet, whether he is getting it directly from Putin, from who he's been talking to, whether there's some proxy between them, and there are various theories about who that might be, who's transmitting them, I don't know. But he is now repeating, and he did it on Friday, but he's done it at other times. He is repeating the Russian worldview, and someone is getting it to him, or he sees it, or it's on his internet feed. I don't know. And that's That's very disturbing because that's, of course, also building this alternative reality in which he and Putin will do a great deal. And, Ukraine's leader is an illegitimate dictator who can be swept away.
I'm going to open up in 1 second, but George, I wanted to come back to you about, losing faith in the people. And Anne was also talking about the question of action and reaction. Jeff Cowie can correct me if I'm wrong, but Thomas Jefferson said something along the lines of the tree of liberty every once in a while needs to be watered with the blood of patriots. And I'm wondering,
tyrants, I think. Didn't he say the blood of tyrants? He said the blood of patriots.
We have a Marshall McLuhan moment.
Yeah.
Jeff.
Jeff Cowie, aren't you in the audience?
Where is he?
He's probably in the other room watching. Yeah. You're a contemporary historian, so no Jefferson. All right, let's stipulate it was patriots, okay? So are we all Hegelians now? Are we waiting for the reaction? Is it going to be people going broke because of tariffs, women dying because they can't get reproductive health care, civil servants lose their jobs, and this is going to cause the reaction? Or are you just even more down than that?
No, waiting, that word makes me very unhappy. The whole point at a moment like this is not to allow yourself to slip into a state of passivity. And that is a strong temptation. You're dazzled, you're shocked, you're disoriented. As soon as you've written your piece about USAID, that ship sailed 2 weeks ago, and now you've missed 5 other unbelievable attacks on the world's people, really. If you look at the programs from USAID that are being destroyed.
That's quite extraordinary.
So waiting is not the thing to do. And it's not just out of some, we must all rise to the occasion. It's because passivity feeds on itself and you become paralyzed if you don't think there's anything to do. My advice is do something. Do something. I don't know what it is, honestly, and different people will have different answers. Fortunately, the three of us are making a living doing something. And I don't know what I would do right now if I didn't have journalism as...
He paying you that well?
So it
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is, we are doing something. I don't know how much good it is. I don't know who's listening to us. We have a lot of subscribers, but they're not really making decisions right now. But for the public who object, do something. Whether it's organizing a civic group, or whether it's preparing to run for local office, or whether it's writing online, whatever, do something so that you yourself, it's almost like don't allow yourself to be flattened by this. Because once that happens, you can't get up again.
Yeah, no, I have this. In fact, I had this conversation this afternoon. I had this conversation almost daily with somebody, a relative or somebody online or somebody in a podcast who wants to know, what can people do so that they don't feel, there are lists people have written. There are, I've written them, you should be involved in you should run for office. You should help somebody else run for office. You should, organize a group around an issue that's important to your community. You should, and often you're right that by doing something, you also overcome this feeling of powerlessness and helplessness that so many people feel.
Write a check to UNICEF. Right now there are the international NGOs that were the life support system of hundreds of millions of people around the world. They've been killed because it turns out America's powerful. They needed our money. Well,
America was supplying 40% of all international humanitarian aid, in all forms, and it was also the country that was supplying a lot of the direction and guidance. So a lot of it was delivered thanks to U.S. logistics. So it's not just the money; it's also the way, the means of delivery, and there isn't an immediate or obvious way to replace it.
And I'd add one more thing. I did say I've become a bit disillusioned with my fellow Americans. I have. Don't so give up on them that you refuse to talk to anyone you disagree with. even if it's going to lead to nothing, which it usually does, you still have to make the effort to talk to them. If you know any of them, right now we're so siloed in our country that the chances are that a Trump partisan may not know any liberal Democrats and vice versa, but you still have to talk to each other.
I mean, then the final point on that is that, I mean, I felt this after the election. It's like my problem is that I love Americans of all different, and I relate to born American. People who vote for Trump are good people who do good things in the world. Some are racist, some are misogynist, some are X, some are Y, some have been misled, if you want to go that route, obviously. But you know, it's just it's polarization. There's also an instrumental reason to like your fellow Americans. Polarization that Trump needs to stay in power requires us to hate each other.
Questions? Please wait for the mic, Christian.
Thanks for your insights tonight. This is wonderful. Christian Anderson. You've alluded to this divide several times. There is evidence that there are certain people who live in a completely different news reality, that they don't even understand some of the things that we're talking about tonight. And we've talked about this silos. Is it irreversible? Is there a way out of this to where we can come to a common understanding of what's actually going on? Because that seems like that's part of what is necessary to have these conversations that you're saying, or is it irreversible?
Can I make one short point on that? I would have said, absent the pandemic, I would have said that the reintroduction of measles would be one of those things that, you know, you can't hide from measles. I mean, it's a physical reality, except that numerous, and the former head of the CDC will tell me that I'm wrong about these numbers, but you know, you can look at the response of the Trump administration to the initial days of the pandemic, and you know, Operation Warp Speed was great. He doesn't own it now because that was involved. That was the production of a vaccine, and you can't take credit for a vaccine, but that was pretty great. But other policies may have led to excess deaths exceeding 300,000, and so you know, I think it's fair to say that more people died than should have died because of policies and an attitude evinced by the first Trump administration. And so, you know, I would say, you know, if I quote a friend from the audience, you know, 10% inflation will do it. Egg prices will do it. The really quotidian stuff would do it. But people in the bubble are really in the bubble. And, you know, I'm sure that if egg prices continue to go up, somehow it's going to be Kamala Harris's fault.
I mean, it's funny. 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a large article in the Atlantic magazine.
Good for you.
Yeah, and it was, I wrote it with
the big time.
That's right.
Yeah.
with my friend Peter Pomerantsev, and the topic was exactly this. The topic was about, could you reform social media? Like, is there a different form of online conversation that would be more productive, more fact-based, more evidence-based, but even just more consensual? Like, are there ways of organizing an online conversation so that it's not polarizing? Because the actual rules, the sort of underlying structure of social media is designed to produce performances, and it gives rewards for outrage. You know, so the more outrageous you are in whatever political direction or even cultural or sexual direction, the more likes and hits and attention you get. So would there be a way to think about organizing an online conversation differently? And the answer is yes, there are ways to think about it, and there are academics who've thought about it and designed it. There are some countries that have tried some experiments with it. Taiwan has tried it in a few different ways. The Taiwanese are particularly focused on questions of disinformation because they face it every day as a kind of very existential challenge from China. But what there hasn't, you know, I should say there have been congressional members of Congress, senators who've talked about legislation that would change the way to regulate it. And of course, there's the possibility of European Union regulation that could also change the way it works. Not moderate it, not design the content, but change the underlying structure and rules, change the way the algorithms work. And it's technically possible it could be done. What there hasn't been yet is anybody brave enough to do it. I mean, the only, India banned TikTok. The US almost banned TikTok and then got scared and stepped back, some version of that. But these aren't, there are more sophisticated and intelligent ways to do it. It's just that there hasn't been no one's had the guts to do it. I still have some hope that the European Union might do it. I mean, if we finally come to the moment where we understand that online polarization and the existence of these alternate realities is doing real damage to our democracy and making it impossible for us to live together, maybe then, and also in the case of Europe, that it's coming from companies that aren't even European. And are bringing in, outside influence for their own reasons. I mean, Elon Musk has his own reasons why he wants the EU to break up. And they're bringing in, maybe then there will be a moment when we have the nerve to do it, but no one's done it yet.
And that will spark the true end of the transatlantic relationship. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but I'm just saying that you can hear the platforms champing at the bit to have that fight.
I mean, actually, well, you've heard it. I mean, This is every time I come to Germany, somebody quotes this at me. I mean, J.D. Vance has said, if you dare regulate social media, then that's the end of NATO. But see, the thing is, if they end NATO first, then that threat is meaningless.
Yeah, there it goes. That's right. Wow. Boy, would that be bad sequencing. Okay. Yes, right over here.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Lars. The Economist is ranking the U.S. Regularly as a flawed democracy. We look at gerrymandering, if we look at most senators are millionaires, if we look at the suppression of votes. My question, are there any pressure groups or politicians in the U.S. who are trying to strategically mend and optimize maybe the American democracy and how it is working?
Many. But do you want to answer that? I mean, I'm in some of those groups, but you probably are too.
I mean, ever since Citizens United, there's been a sense that is the key to turn to start to get fresh air into American democracy, because it would lead to more competition. It would lead to less corporate control over politics. It would lead to Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision from about 15 years ago that essentially ruled that money is speech and that there is no limit to how much you can spend on a campaign, whether it's direct giving to the campaign or dark money, which is given to the parties. And there are limits to what you can give to a campaign, but if you want to give $30 billion, then you have to turn the lights out and give it to a political action committee that gives it to the parties or to a campaign. It's a shell game. It's a fraud. And so the Supreme Court opened the gates to unlimited money in politics, which means that elections now cost I don't know, what did the last, anyone know? Maybe $100 billion? Who knows? The problem is every fine idea of reformers, whether it's gerrymandering, whether it's money in politics, whether it's the idea of ranked choice voting, which can have some success at the local level, we so hate each other politically that if one side suggests it, the other side will kill it. It's just automatic. It's like a reflex. There is no deliberation. There is no, let's get the problem-solving caucus together in the House to try to work out a compromise at both parties. It will be killed by one party or the other, and most likely by the Republican Party, because their instinct for the jugular, frankly, is just a lot stronger than the Democratic Party's, and their hatred seems to be stronger. So that hatred is the core problem. There's plenty of good ideas and there's plenty of good organizations, but as long as my political idea is your loss, and therefore you have to kill my idea. None of it will work because we are a 50-50 country. Now, there's been a kind of movement, especially on the left, to say we are not a majority rule country. We have a Senate that is grossly unrepresentative. Like if Wyoming and California have the same number of senators, we have a Supreme Court that is not elected and that seems to be making legislative decisions. We have we have gerrymandering that stacks state legislatures. So we have all kinds of ways in which we do not allow the majority to rule. And if only we got rid of those things and maybe even had a constitutional convention, a second one, then democracy would flourish. I've always been a little skeptical of that, and now I'm really skeptical because look at the results of our elections. It just doesn't work out that way. We are 50-50. We've been 50-50 for longer than we were in the Gilded Age, which is the closest parallel to this. And so I fear a second constitutional convention. Who knows what Elon Musk might get done in a second constitutional convention? I would rather work with our terribly flawed, creaky old one and maybe find a way to get past this period of mutual hatred, because that is the fundamental problem in our politics.
Just to say, there is at the state level, there is a movement to rewrite state constitutions, which may have as its aim the rewriting eventually of the American Constitution, but it's not coming from a liberal point of view. Just to say, I mean, there are a lot of organizations that do fight gerrymandering, do voter participation, to, that as George said, to look at changes to electoral laws at the state level and so on. But he's right; they haven't been able to have a national impact yet.
Okay. I see people all the way in the back, preferably a female person, because we haven't had a female person yet.
What about me? What am
in
I?
The back?
Chopped liver? No.
I haven't called on you.
Hi, as the female person asking a question.
That's right. I couldn't hear that. What was that?
Thank you so much for your time. This has been incredibly useful. We've been discussing Ukraine and Russia quite a bit. I was wondering if y'all would be willing to weigh in on what feels like a million years ago, but was quite recently, the meeting with Netanyahu and the subsequent AI video of Trump creating some type of utopia in Gaza.
It says you've written all over it.
I was wondering if you think, again, we need to more parse President Trump's words. Do you think this will actually match some type of action in the region? Thank you so much.
Oh, I've already made a reservation at the Ritz-Carlton Gaza. So I got an email and I said, send credit cards. I just did. I don't know. That was I don't know. I don't want to address the Middle East conflict right now. In some or in part, but I would say there's an interesting dynamic going on in Washington right now. And I saw that AI video. By the way, that AI video means nothing except it means everything, in the sense that, again, it's a velocity question. The more we see AI manipulation of reality or manufacturing of totally new reality, it's like a cognitive tsunami, right? You can't possibly correct everything that's going on, especially on platforms that want that kind of cognitive chaos. But the interesting thing in Washington right now is that many supporters of Israel, or a good number of supporters of Israel, support Trump. A good number of supporters of Netanyahu's vision of Israel, at least, support Trump, and they argue that Trump is a loyal friend of Israel and that Israel will benefit in various ways from a relationship with Trump. And I think that this belief is in defiance of everything we know about Trump, who is purely transactional. And I mean, there are societal reasons. There are people around Trump who obviously encourage a close relationship with Netanyahu. But the idea that he's going to be loyal to Israel as a matter of his own moral vision or ethics or his own sincerely held beliefs, I think, is absurd only because he doesn't believe in anything. He believes in a transaction for transaction's sake. And so you can imagine a situation in which Saudi Arabia, which is ultimately more important to Trump and his family for obvious commercial reasons, if Saudi Arabia makes a demand, we'll recognize Israel if Israel does X, Y, and Z, and Israel doesn't want to do X, Y, and Z. I don't think you necessarily see a ritualized humiliation episode like you saw with Zelensky in the Oval Office, but you could. I mean, there's nothing stable about, there are no friendships. There's only the transaction, there's only political pressure. So the idea that he is, and there's a deeper problem for Israel and its seeming reliance, or this government's reliance on Trump, which is that if the United States continues down this path, which is to say, if the government of the United States is dismantled over time, and if our society becomes completely dysfunctional, and if our country and its leaders have a difficult time absorbing and analyzing reality, what good is a friend like that to a country? I mean, that's obviously an advertisement for Europe to go faster in building up its defense and foreign policy independence and making sure that they're not reliant on an America. But this America, unless there's a reaction, as you two point out, unless there's some significant reaction, this America that we're talking about is not going to be capable of delivering safety, security, prosperity to its remaining friends in the world. So that's not necessarily what you were asking, or just a piece of what you were asking, but it's been on my mind.
So I'd like to turn to a question from the home audience. And this viewer writes in, one of my concerns is violence and the threat of violence. Many prominent voices have lost security support, and some apparently have already had to stay away from public discussion. And I would add, it seems like quite a number of members of Congress have been intimidated by all kinds of threats into supporting things that they otherwise never would have supported. George, you're the one with the finger closest to the people, it seems.
I would not.
Yeah,
I would
on the
not
pulse
claim
of the
that.
people.
I would never claim that.
Yes.
I'm a lower
Jeff's a
upper
little
middle
concerned
class
about
elite.
where your fingers
Put your
are.
fingers away.
Yeah.
Violence. We've been talking about it for years. There is violence, but it's scattered political violence we're talking about. It's scattered. It has not erupted in the way our imaginations anticipate, like the movie Civil War. We haven't seen sort of militia on militia violence, and so maybe we miss the quieter, more subtle examples. But there hasn't been as much as most people expected maybe 10 years ago. Books have been written about this. And one reason there isn't violence now is because the violent ones won the election.
Power, yes.
So they don't need to be violent. They can be violent with chainsaws rather than with firearms. But will the left become violent? That's a question. I think we won't see much of that. There isn't.
Well, to be fair, we did sort of communally memory hold the Scalise shooting.
There was a shooting of a congressional softball game. That was.
And there was a person who was stalking Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, there've been deranged people on both sides.
Tried to shoot
but it's not organized, Jeff. It's not organized like on the right. You don't have men going off into the woods in order to train. At least we don't know about them. Maybe you should assign that to somebody. Are there left-wing militias beginning to form in Fairfield County, Connecticut?
No, look. The existential problem for the center left or the urban elites in America is that the other team grows all the food and has all the guns. So like that's if you're really thinking that we're heading towards civil war, and I'm not, that's a dilemma.
I think the real threat of violence that I worry about now is state violence, because they have the apparatus of the state, and if there are massive demonstrations a la summer of 2020 about whatever. It's not going to be about Ukraine. I'm sorry. I wish it was, but I don't think it will be. But it might be about people losing their jobs and losing their Social Security, their Medicaid and Medicare, whatever. Trump is sort of champing at the
And
bit.
has said he wants to invoke
use
the
military.
Insurrection Act.
He wants to, because that's a
and
form of power
he has a Secretary of Defense and who will do it, and he has, maybe, we don't know, a Joint Chiefs Chairman, a new one. He fired the other one, obviously, for once mentioning the fact that black people were oppressed in the United States at one point. He took, C.Q. Brown took the radical position that slavery existed. So we don't know what he can do. We do know that this time it's not going to be shoot them in the legs. It's not going to be merely shoot them in the legs, as it was in the George Floyd protest 2020.
I would add one other little nuance, which is George is right that we all have a kind of image in our mind of what political violence looks like, and it looks like the Civil War, or it looks like brown shirts in the streets, right? We all know that. Nowadays, now that people live so much online and so much of their daily experience is online, there's another form. It's not violence, but the formation of mobs and kind of mob stalking and doxing and attacks are now something that happen online. I mean, it may be that you don't need political violence of the kind we remember from the 1930s, because you have these, or you can eliminate someone from a conversation just by sicking, not just bots, but real people on them. Lots of people have been scared off Twitter or run out of social media, or forced to roll back what they say and think because of fear of what you can encounter online. And that's also, it's not violence, but it is a form of mob rule, and that we now have, and we now have that in every country.
Hands, please, right here.
Hello. To return to the idea of how to get out of this mess and the obstacles to doing so, like siloing of information, excuse me, and an inability to agree on what's real. I'm wondering if you see the economy in the US as being an obstacle to liberal democracy. And what I mean by that is that it seems to me that we're trending, that neoliberalism is just intensifying. We're moving toward a financialized sort of capitalism where there are huge investments in digital technology, cryptocurrency, AI, and that sort of an economic system is quite incompatible with liberal democracy. And so I'm wondering if you see that as an obstacle, and if you do, how do you think that might be overcome?
I'll just say briefly. I mean, I think actually it started earlier. I mean, so the rise of anonymous money, shell companies, anonymously purchased property, the widespread use of offshore bank accounts, the ways in which money flowed around the world over the last 10 or 20 years and began to accelerate. The way in which autocratic leaders, starting with Russia, who sort of invented this, began to use Western financial institutions to steal and launder money and move it around. I mean, I think a lot of that is the precursor to what we're seeing now. And in particular, there is a reason why autocracies are more secretive. We know that Putin and Xi Jinping are both very, very wealthy. They're billionaires. Some say Putin is the richest person in the world. But we have no idea where their money is, how they got it, where they keep it, how it's moved, who's controlling it right now. And that's a sign of a dictatorship. As we began to have a breakdown in transparency in our country, in the US, but also in Europe, by the way. And I think this is something that Europe should have paid much more attention to a lot earlier. We also have had the growth of autocratic practices and in other ways. So I do think they're connected.
And the inauguration was revealing because it was Trump and the oligarchs. I mean, it was a strange panorama of the richest people in America and the tribune of the people. And so there's an inherent flaw in the Trump project right now that he has brought into it, I think, because he's so seduced by very rich people. There's Musk and there's, I don't know whether you want to call it Vance. Bannon is, I think, too peripheral now. He makes a lot of noise, but I don't think he has a whole lot of power. But Vance is certainly someone who's been a critic of neoliberalism as a populist. How is Trump going to have both of these heads together in the same government? I think if Musk becomes the real face and engine of the Trump administration, that's going to be very bad for Trump. It's a huge liability for him with the public. Musk is not liked, and big tech is not liked. But if it's Vance, and if it's someone who gets to scapegoat Haitians while talking about the rights and the needs of the real Americans, that's a powerful message, and I think it can be one that just keeps winning. And it's both a challenge and an opening for the Democrats to figure out how not to be the party of the oligarchs.
This is the same J.D. Vance whose fortune was given to him by Peter Thiel.
It is. If you start looking for consistency in any of these guys, you're going to be very frustrated. Yeah. But his posture now is the guy who has 10 generations of Vances buried in one cemetery. That's the persona he presented at the convention.
Yeah. And his children will be buried there too, he told us. Which is creepy.
Yeah,
they will. I guess he's already got their little graves picked out. Yeah. Anyway.
So being mindful of where we are, I want to ask the three of you for your brief bits of advice to Europe in the age of Trump. Who wants to start? And you're nodding already.
I have many views. Europe. This is the moment when Europe needs to, in my view, there are two things that it needs to do. One, obviously, is the thing that's beginning to happen already, which is to create a coalition of the willing around defense and security, written more broadly. So not just military security, but let's broaden and deepen the conversation about sabotage, about cybersecurity, and so on. It can't happen in the EU because Hungary can block it, and also the EU doesn't have the UK and Norway, which we need. And it might not be able to happen in NATO. I don't know yet, because NATO is structured around an American leadership that may or may not be there. I don't want to eliminate it forever, but there needs to be a mechanism by which a few important things can be done. If a defense fund is raised, but also some mechanism by which European countries can either order troops or send weapons. There needs to be something created. I mean, it doesn't have to have a building. It doesn't have to have an acronym, but it has to have a real existence. And I think people do understand this. It just hasn't quite happened yet. The second thing I would say is, there is going to be, and this has started already, so I'm not saying anything that's new or surprising. There is going to be a joint, maybe not coordinated, but certainly a two-pronged effort to put enormous pressure on the European Union, and it's going to come from the United States, and it's going to come from Russia. And if the European Union is going to survive, it needs to think about how it will resist this pressure. I mean, personally, I think something I've already spoken about, which is the regulation of U.S. tech companies and a deep examination of the effect that the structure of social media has on European democracy is part of that story. But there may also have to be other pieces of it. I don't know whether this has sunk in or not, but it's clear to me now that for different reasons, there will be two-pronged pressure. It will take the form of propaganda. It will take the form of economic pressure. It may or may not be connected to the war in Ukraine. And, this is really the moment now. If people want to keep that institution, if they care about it, if they think it's brought them prosperity, this is the moment to think about how it's going to be defended, how the arguments are going to be made, and what will be done to shore it up.
George?
Well, I've been here 36 hours or so, and I am sort of encouraged, actually. I had this sense of a shock, and yet maybe more than Americans, I feel that Germans are beginning to think beyond the shock. And we're still living in the shock. It's around us every day. But the Germans I've talked to, Europeans, whatever you want to say, have already begun to think, what does this mean for us? It's a clarifying moment. It's an existential moment. And that has given me a little bit of hope that this is going to be the Zeitenwende, that this time that really happens. I think the biggest challenge, and I'm talking to elites, right? I have to understand who I'm talking to. The biggest challenge will be for them to bring their publics around to an acknowledgement that Russia is a threat, that America is not to be counted on, and that their way of life, their security, their prosperity, their freedom depends on this change. And that if they want to just say, can't we just be left alone and go about our lives and have our currywurst, as I had at lunch today, can't you leave us alone? The elites there's always been this division. It goes back to what I saw here in 2014 when the beginning of the Ukraine war happened. And there was this division between elite and ordinary Germans. And I think it's probably crucial now for that division not to widen into a political gap that essentially paralyzes the government and the decision makers from being able to effectuate the change.
I think that was for the curryverse there.
That was the curryverse.
Yeah.
I forgot who said this. It was just said in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, that there's something strange about a situation in which 500 million Europeans are looking to 330 million Americans to protect themselves from 140 million
Donald
Russians.
Tusk said it.
Tusk said it. Donald Tusk, the new leader of Europe, quite possibly. But it was a great quote, and it goes to this learned helplessness, learned over obviously a few generations. And so, it's, look, Obama said it. George W. Bush said it. They said it politely, but they said, you guys have to do more. And Europe didn't listen, and now it's on the cusp of being too late, but it's probably not too late, in fact. So what Donald Trump has forced Europe to do is actually take charge of its own defense. The size of these armies and the capability of these armies and the lack of integration among European armies is really something to behold. But obviously it can be done. It's not a question ultimately of money. It's a question of will and desire to stay free and understand that Europe has not escaped the cycle of history. I'm perpetually surprised at the way the world is, but I believe very, very strongly in German rearmament. And I know that for good reasons and self-serving reasons, there are a lot of Germans who are extremely worried about German rearmament and building up German military capabilities. And I know that there are a lot of Germans who are sincerely looking for, let's call it, kosher certification for such an historic move. But Germany, I think I think most people would agree, or many people would agree, is a force for good in the world. I think Germany can handle power. And I think, and to quote from one of the many speeches Anne has given on the subject, pacifism is not necessarily the right lesson to learn for Germans from German history. It's that you can use force for good and bad. And this is a moment, obviously, where Germany should step up, rearm, and make it as difficult as possible for Vladimir Putin and his allies to conquer territory that we know he wants to conquer. Donald Trump doesn't understand that he wants to conquer it at all costs, but we understand that he wants to conquer. And so the answer is make yourself difficult to conquer.
So there was a famous remark that I'm going to mangle, I'm sure, from British Foreign Secretary in the 19th century, who said he summoned the New World to redress the imbalance of the old. It sounds like we need the old world to step up and take care of a few things to redress some of the problems in the New World right now. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to invite everyone here to, first of all, have a look at the book table right out here, where you can stock up on all your reading material, because I'm sure your appetites for reading endlessly about democracy has just been whetted. And also, I invite you to have a drink with us in the next room, where you can pin our panelists against the wall and ask them the 20 questions we didn't get to here. But let me just quickly say, regarding upcoming events, as I mentioned, this is Jeff Goldberg Week in Berlin. And tomorrow night, we expect it to become a regular event, though. Yeah. You can have your office away from your office here. So tomorrow at the Deutsches Theater in Berlin Mitte, there will be a conversation that Jeff will moderate with playwright Ayad Akhtar, who's here somewhere. I saw him. There he is. And novelist, writer, and all-around wise person Daniel Kelman, who's also here. Oh, sitting next to Ayad Akhtar. They're preparing.
They're ready for their panel.
They're cribbing. We could go straight to it. Yeah. Anyway, the subject will be art, AI, and the stories we tell. There's still a few tickets left at the Deutsches Theater, so go to their website if you'd like to join us tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And on Thursday at 7:30, it will be at the Berliner Festspiel as part of the series Reflexes and Reflections on the Future of Debate Culture. And Jeffrey Goldberg will moderate a panel on Donald Trump, A Polarized Public and the End of Democracy with Alice Hester, Saba Norichima, and Meron Mendel. And tickets are available via the Berlin Festspiel website. And then on Sunday, you're giving a concert at the Olympia Stadium.
My Schubert performance. Yes.
You'll be doing the warm-up for Springsteen, who's coming.
And then I'll be doing interpretive dance, but just on the lawn, alone.
Well, anyway, this has been a great reunion for the American Academy, and I really want to thank you all for coming. Thanks to The Atlantic for making it possible. Thanks to the three of you for being here. I hope you'll give them all a warm welcome. A warm gratitude. Yeah.